everyone. My name is Judith Cano, and as part of the Deusto International team, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Deusto International Talks, in particular to today's session, Fashion Law and Management, Current Trends. Before we start, we would like to inform you that the talk is being recorded so that you receive the session's videos afterwards. During this webinar, please feel free to make any questions or comments you may have through the chat box. At the end of the session, our guest panelists will reply to your questions and comments posted during their conversation. The fashion industry is going through a significant process of change due to the globalization and impact of new technologies. Fashion is one of the pillars of the nation's identity, with innovative and dynamic firms that have become powerful economic drivers. This Deusto International Talk will deal with the current trends of fashion sector from both sides, the legal and the management point of view. And in order to discuss and analyze this interesting topic, I am delighted to introduce you today's guest panelists. From one side, we have Tim Williams, course leader of the graduate diploma fashion management at Deusto College of Fashion at University of the Arts, London. Tim has been working for the Fashion Business School for 11 years, teaching across a wide variety of fashion business courses and supervising final year dissertations. Welcome, Tim. David Fuentes, who is an associate lawyer in Bird & Bird Madrid office with experience across a wide range of intellectual property world. His practice covers IP-related matters with particular expertise in copyright and related rights. And finally, also, we will give the floor to Helen Montgomery, Fashion Business School Development Manager at London College of Fashion from the University of the Arts of London. So thank you all, the three of you, for your time for today's session. And now, Helen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for that introduction and a very warm welcome to everyone. I'm speaking from London. So before we get started with the international talk, I just wanted to talk to you about an amazing collaborative opportunity that we have coming up this summer. It's a course which we've developed on the back of an agreement that LCF has with the University of Deusto. And this summer we will be we're co-delivering a course which is designed around fashion law and management, so by the areas of expertise from each college. The course will take place in Spain at the end of June, so from the 27th of June to the 1st of July. It will be interactive, participative, and it will be led by international experts from each college. So LCF will be delivering around fashion management and University of Deusto around aspects of fashion law. It's an amazing opportunity and should be a fabulous experience. So if you are interested in finding out more or want to sign up for it, there are links to how to sign up on the University of Deusto web pages, also on LinkedIn, and we can put a link as well in the chat to today's session. So hopefully that will be of interest to you. I'll now hand back so we can continue with today's session. Thank you.
Hello, would you like me to start, Helen?
If you're ready, Tim, yes.
Yep, fine, no problem. Thanks very much, Helen, and thanks very much, Philippe, and really good to meet you, David. First of all, can you see the screen I'm working on? Can you see my cursor moving around?
Not yet, Tim.
Let's try it now. Does that work now?
Perfectly well, thank you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, can you see my cursor moving around on the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because I do like to point at things. Welcome, everybody. I really appreciate the time that you're giving us Philippe and the team, and I'm really grateful to have this audience here. I do really like questions. Please, any questions, please put them in the chat box. It's great to hear back from people. And my job is to communicate with people and let them know what, well, to basically teach. That's why I'm here today. What I'm going to talk about is, when I spoke to Philippe the other day, we haven't got long, and the fashion business is very, very large and complex and goes back something like sort of 7,000 years. So I thought, you know, let's concentrate on one particular aspect of it. And this is something dear to my heart. It's manufacturing and design and making. And I thought I'd start off the back pocket of a pair of my jeans here. We're seeing the label, which is a pair of Edwin jeans. We're seeing the twin needle stitching made with a particular machine. There's the origin of the fabric, the fact that the fabric's worn out. And so there's a wealth of information you can actually get by looking at garments and actually understanding how they're made. And that really does relate certainly to intellectual property, guarding your business and making sure that you work within the law. And that's why I'm so pleased to be involved in this presentation today. I'm going to talk through basically what I call points of inquiry. The first section is going to be like how we got here today. And I'm going to go back 100 years or so, and then observation on what some companies are doing. And that's really what I want you to leave you with, is the ability to look at garments and look at companies and understand how they made. This is me here, if you can believe it. And this is me teaching. A lot of what I like to do with the students is take garments to pieces, understand how they're made, understand the machinery that goes into making them, and understand how garments are made at scale. It's relatively easy to make one garment, but it's very expensive. You can make 100,000 garments, but that needs a high capital cost. Both of those garments have to be sold. And I've worked over the years. I left college quite some time ago. I worked for Hardy Amis. That was menswear I used to make for the Queen. Chelsea Girl was fast fashion, and that took me around the world. Conman Design Group was BHS, which is a big chain store. Then worked for Debenhams, and then I worked for a company called Agent Provocateur that did ladies' underwear. I used to make for them, and I also had my own concession in Selfridges. And then overlapping that was the teaching, first at Central St Martin's and then at LCF. And I'm a graduate of both those colleges as well. So I'm very proud of the fact I'm going back to my original colleges. I'm a designer, but I find knowing what you can make very inspirational, and to put all your time and effort into having something designed and made, to me is very important. I've got quite a sort of long sort of way of looking at things. This is a sort of frightening little sort of a chart which I do for myself, and this keeps me on my toes. I can remember my granddad on my mother's side. He married quite late. He was actually born in 1880. So I remember someone born in 1880, just as the Kodak company was starting up for cheap photography, just as Bell's patent for a phone was started. The transatlantic phone didn't start till 1940. We had the work from Claude Shannon with digital computers in 1950. 58, I was born. That brought onto the ARPANET. 1981, I graduate. All the way through my working life, this technology has just kept coming on. Sometimes the inventions are relatively old, but however, they've been developed and they have become cheaper. And it's this use of cheap technology, which everyone can have access to, that I think has had the biggest effect on this world. So we've worked from the World Wide Web, HTML, Netscape, cheap data, iPhone, 5G. Now, the thing that I'm always mindful of, my students, most of my students are born in the early 2000s, some of them a little bit older than that. I'm expecting my students to retire in 2060. So we're looking at quite a few decades, and I think how far the world has changed just in my lifetime, and I expect the lifetime of the students as well. It is our job essentially just to keep learning and keep finding out. I'm just looking on my second screen here. Are there any questions anyone's asking? I'm just looking at I don't actually have the panel up here, but I'm going to assume that's everything's okay. Okay, so moving on to the next slide here. The technology of sewing has not changed that much. There's a guy called Elias Howe. His moment of genius was to, oops, let's just get that going back like that. That as goes. His moment of genius, needles, essentially, the sharp pointy bit went through the fabric and there's a hole in the end where the thread goes. He turned it round the other way and invented the sewing machine, which was then developed by Singer. In the 60s, we invented automatic thread cutting, servo motors and things like that. But you can still make clothes on a machine that was made in 1880. What has changed, obviously, is the distribution and the way we actually market. The things that have been the most influence on fashion is the way things are made. And that's just a quick image here I'm showing. This is of Hermes. And this is showing a guy sewing, and it's what's called a saddle stitch. And that's what these machines, the machine down the bottom there represents, is something being joined together. And now instead of working by hand, which will take you, say, 10 minutes to do, well, an hour to do a meter of hand sewing, depending on the stitch, is now done at 1,400 stitches a minute, very, very fast. So we now have this ability to have tremendous volume and tremendous make. Clothing business is all about detail. And if you ever want to realize how important the make is, all sewing machines use needles. If you have the wrong point at the end of the needle, it will break the fabric and the fabric will fall to pieces. If you do something even worse than that and the needle breaks and that's left inside the garment, you will lose your contract. So this business and the management of fashion is all about details. 1 minute we're thinking on the big scale, rather thinking of the physical distribution of the garments. The next minute we have to make sure that this garment works well individually for the customer and satisfies them in every way, because we don't want any problems that are actually made. We have words which we still use, which have been going around for some time. We have phrases like off the peg. We have that be spoken for, and that's where we get these terms ready to wear, made to measure, pret-à-porter, haute couture. We have words like shoddy, pure new wool, and these all come through the history of making. Clothes used to be handmade individually. Now that we've moved into mass production, and that consumes ideas. And that's why this whole idea of intellectual property and guarding your ideas and safeguarding your ideas is so important, because you're moving into a very complex marketplace here. I put in the word shoddy here, and that used to be recycled wool. And we used to recycle wool, and this comes into this whole idea of sustainability. Now we don't, because wool's become relatively cheap. But we may go back into recycling wool because our technology has now become so much better. They're key people in the industry I'd like you to look at. There's a woman called Lee Edelcourt who talks about that maybe we need to think of design in a different way. Instead of moving on fashion, which is about constant change, constant involvement, it's throwing away merchandise which maybe you've just had for a few weeks. Maybe we need to think in terms of more longevity. There are words contained in fashion like identity, how you see yourself, maybe displaying your wealth, your ownership, which is now changing because we have some rental models. We may start buying secondhand. Sometimes clothing is by showing power, your economic power, how you interact with other people. Also, clothing has an idea of obsolescence. Obviously, it does wear out, but on the other hand, you may look down on someone for not wearing something that's the latest fashion, if you like, as well as some garments which are timeless and some garments which are classic. So it's very much embedded in our culture. But out of all of these things, I'd summarize, and it's all about the new. So in showing the new, you want to show an element of originality, you want to show ideas, and you really want to protect those ideas. How have we got here? Two people to really look at, and it'd be interesting to know how many of you are actually studying fashion or whether you're researching into it. I'd suggest two starting points, quite traditional forms. So there's Thorstein Veblen, who wrote the theory of the leisure class and how we look for status within our society. And then, of course, as I'm sure you all know as business students, there's Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, when he talked about division work and the pin factory. So you combine those two ideas of status along with this amazing ability we have to produce clothes at scale through division work, and then extending through globalization of differential in labor in different economies. And now, of course, we have issues like COVID and globalization, and the world is going, I would suggest, in a, we're going through a renaissance in terms of technology, but also a certain period of instability I think we're going through at the moment. This incidentally is how I teach division work at college. I get all my students to, I teach them individually. I teach each student one separate fold. I put them all little teams and they sit on their tables and they do just one type of fold. And I then create a room, a little factory room essentially. Then we all create these birds, and then I turn around and say, well, look, who can make the origami crow? Well, of course none of them can, because I've all gone through this process of de-skilling. But along with de-skilling, you then create a tremendous quality and a tremendous way of making as well. So again, I want to emphasize as well the practical implications of making. We now have a much bigger way of scaling up. We have this very specialized machinery. There's a machine right in the middle. I won't point on my slides with the slide because everything goes a bit sort of weird, but there are machines up in the top right. There's a Union Special machine there. It's probably about 100 years old. And then there are computerized machines in the center there, and workstations and things like that. Now, all this machinery can be put anywhere in the world. All this machinery can make identical garments. So lots of the designer's job or the the company's job is to provide that differentiation, is to provide that ability to get a competitive advantage. Now, along with that, we have companies like Juki down the bottom supplying all this machinery, this incredible standard that we can now make clothes now at incredibly low prices. I've come up with some basic models here. Now I've made full use of all the little logos and diagrams you can get on the Microsoft PowerPoint. So I was looking at the different ways we actually purchase clothes. Now, one of the earliest models, if you like, was couture. And that happens at all scales. It could be the local dressmaker making a garment for someone in the local village, or it could be the grand couturier working in Paris, or it could be someone having a wedding dress made. And this is what they say about a wedding dress. It's usually the one chance a lady has a chance to experience that idea of having something actually made for her, something individual. And so, of course, that raises the question when it comes to large-scale couture, do you want to be the only person wearing it? Do you want to be copied? Do you want the look for less? Do you want to be part of the crowd? So there's some very interesting sort of social constructs which go in there. Now this model, oh, sorry, just before I forget, down the bottom you can see Karl Lagerfeld, who died recently, which is very sad. There's a documentary here called Chanel. It's called House of Chanel. And I do recommend you trying to get hold of a copy of it and watching it, as it goes through the couture process of making clothes at this level. And you suddenly realize that it is all about the event, seeing all the clothes on display. And that's why I put all those international currency down there, and I put the camera on the right. So couture has still survived, despite the fact it is incredibly expensive, but maybe that's because is why it survived, because it's seen as very high level, it's seen as ambitious, it's seen as display. Now, not everyone can afford couture, so we invented something called ready to wear. I've done something on purpose. You see the little logo there, I put a tape measure by the lady. So that implies she goes off to the dressmaker or she goes off to the couturier, then she has the actual dress made for her. Now, the way we do ready to wear is different. So I put little tape measures there to say that size is standardized. We have the make is standardized. And then we have a different system. We have a supplier, it could be a brand, it could be a wholesaler. They work directly with a factory. The factory then sells to different stores. And this used to be the old model when I first started making. The buyer, if you like, and I worked for a small chain store, which is Chelsea Girl, which is now quite big. They would go off to a supplier. The supplier would have a range of clothes. The supplier would also sell to other companies as well. They'd put all those orders together, and then they'd be sent off to the factory. And that was the beginning of globalization, the beginning of make. But it did something very, very interesting, and this is something I'll be talking about later. It spread the risk. There's always a risk in making a large amount of anything. You can get very, very good prices if you order, say, 50,000 of something, 48,000 if you want to work in dozens. If you're making a one-off, like the couture model, that can be very expensive. It's much better to set up a lot of machinery. You need to obviously sell all those garments. Now, if you, and you'll see later on in other business models, you're working directly with factories, but in this case, there'd be a buyer and there'd be a designer and there'd be a relationship between the two, and the risk would be spread. So everything was actually distributed. Now, down the bottom, I've sort of put a little color coding for the type of retailers. There's two sorts there. I put a basket for a basic shop, and I put a little booklet there for a catalog. And there are a number of baskets there. So down the red on the right-hand side, that would be a store with many, many shops. And I worked for one of those stores. So I think we ended up at about sort of 300 shops and things like that. That then gives you tremendous buying power. And that enabled later on, you'll see in the other models, to go directly to factories. The other thing is that these catalogs here, and these were paper catalogs, these were things that were printed and left in someone's house. And that, if you like, was a promise to have that stock available. So this model was quite inefficient in some ways, in so much you had to buy ahead. You had to place your orders, you had to get your orders made, and then they would arrive in the UK or wherever, you put them in a stock place, and then you start selling them out. So it was quite an unwieldy model. It was quite a seasonal model as well, but that's the model we had probably right up until the 80s and the 90s, and still the new technology was actually put in. In terms of risk, from a business point of view, you could work, one option. This is what I like to do. You put one product type in the shop, and you wait for the person who likes it to walk past. Or there could be lots of changing options in your shop. Attracts good footfall, sales. So if you like, that's fashion. So all the time there's this trade-off between, are you going to change your merchandise all the time? How will you know what sells? What's your relationship with the supplier? How are you going to spread the risk? How are you going to choose things? Because maybe you only want 2 or 3 of something just to put them in the shop window, but you put your bulk stock in the back. And that's one of the things that buyers and merchandisers do. They sort out the risk. Now, all that can change once you start changing the relationship and changing the volumes with the store. Now, obviously, these buyers wouldn't work in a vacuum. There would be seasonal shows. And again, these are sort of legacy companies, if you like. Now, Premier Vision, very much up and running at the moment, but traditionally it was a private show just for people buying fabric maybe 18 months ahead of the season. So there'd be color prediction services, there'd be ideas on what the themes are going to be. You go off to this trade fair, you'd start speaking to people, you see all the ideas, and then suddenly you realize, right, okay, in a couple of seasons time, spring, summer 24, autumn, winter 25, it's going to be these types of fabrics and things like that. So the big stores would buy into these ideas and then start doing them. And there was very much this trickle down idea that everything, say, started from the top, from couture or famous people, and then eventually it would get spread out. The media then was completely different, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But certainly we have legacy stores like Premier Vision, Pret-a-Porter, for example, which is ready to wear, very flourishing. But flourishing in a particular way for more about the luxury end. So these would be the small boutiques. These would be the buyers who really know their customers and know what to get for their customers. Then the model started changing. And as I mentioned, these stores kept expanding. They get to say it's about 300 stores. And then that suddenly meant that they could buy in tremendous quantity, which meant they could go directly off to a factory. So then we had this whole idea of globalization and something that's called private label. Now, the idea of private label, that instead of buying a brand, let's say it's Levi's or Wrangler or Lee Jeans or something like that, you create your own jean. In other words, sometimes you can provide the look for less, which I'm sure David will talk about later. But you create this whole idea of a private label and you do your own merchandise and you distribute it. There is a lot of risk in that because you are placing money, you're putting your money in a certain amount of product, you're bringing it back to the UK, and you'll have a few £100,000 or euros tied up in that money, and you hope that it will sell. And if it doesn't, you're going to have to mark it down. And there are various metrics that we use for working on the pricing structure there. Very much a process of limited information. And that's why buyers were sort of paid so much money to have that instinct to understand what's going on. And obviously, from a management point of view, it's all about risk. How are you going to take the risk? How are you going to decide what you're going to sell? And the reason for that is there's so many variables. You've got the fabric color, garment design, number of sizes, how long will it remain popular? Now, quite often all of that is in the eye of the beholder. It's in that customer. And now it's getting even more tricky, as I'll talk about in a minute. So we had the fashion information, which I mentioned before, and this is the traditional information that we used to have. There'd be professional organizations like Premier Vision, for example. There'd be WGSN, which is flourishing at the moment for fashion prediction, and then we get all the magazines, and that's actually quite an old picture, which I've got in there. Now, the way business has evolved, that if you're a brand, you wouldn't necessarily know how your garments are selling, because all that would happen is a buyer would come up, order 100 dozen from you, or 100 pieces, or 48 or whatever. They'd take them at the beginning of the season. Then if you're lucky, they'll bring you back after a few months and say, can we have some more? Or they may never ring you back. So you'll never know the rate of sale. You'll never know what sizes are sold. You may have a good relationship with the buyer and she or he may tell you, but you're working blind. If, however, you own your own retail shop, you have information coming in every day. You can find out what's left. In fact, finding out what people don't buy is very important information. And later on, when we move on to websites, I'll talk a little bit about that. But part of my job working for a retailer was to go off, spend some time in the store and just see people buying things, seeing people, someone picking something up, looking at it and then putting it back again. That was the really valuable information you wanted. And sometimes we'll work on the till and find out what was going on. But that, to me, is my belief on why private label, in other words, selling directly to the consumer, has been so successful, because you get that incredibly valuable information. And then later on, I mentioned the information you get on websites. We still have all of these just a catch-up slide here on Premier Vision with the amount of information that's actually available to you as a buyer and as a designer. So now we have the internet. Now, this has done the most amazing thing, which was actually underestimated, I believe, by the catalog people and certainly by the retailers. They thought it was just another form of distance purchasing. They thought it was no more than just buying from a catalog, and they thought the big catalog stores will you know, they'll win. They couldn't be more wrong, because there's a fundamental about a website is that you can't fill it up. You can have a website. If something does sell, you can keep it on there. If it doesn't sell, you can take it off. You can keep it in there. You can do loads of things, which I talk about there. But this whole business of the way that we now buy things and the way we sell things and the scale at which we purchase now has changed completely. I do mention that if you want to ask me questions about this later, about vertical and horizontal businesses, I'm very happy to do so. We have a huge amount of information, because obviously everybody who's got a website, all you have to do is look at the data on the website, run it through what they call web scraping robots, and then you can detect what prices they are. You can link up price with an image. You can see whether there's been any change. And that way, the computers and the buyers are now starting to make the decisions, especially at scale. I would say not. If it comes to working on very small ranges and individual companies, I'd say not so much. But certainly when you're working on a very, very big scale, you need this information to work out your efficiencies. Now, I've looked at this really from a design and production point of view. Now, the old model was having as many shops as possible. Now you don't need all of those shops, because you can sell partially online. You can have your store as a flagship. People can go in there and start, then decide to buy online. What they can also do, though, is walk into your shop with a mobile phone and buy from someone else. So this market has become very volatile and very, very difficult. Fashion information is now more granular. The market information for the consumer is now a lot more open. Personally, I think we've got what we call a flower auction model. In other words, the price starts off very high and then just keeps dropping down until people buy it. And that's almost how I look at the relationship now. We have our consumer with a mobile phone. She may go into a shop. She's got all these different relationships with different companies, some of which she's buying on a regular basis, sometimes sporadically, sometimes occasionally. It could be an absolutely huge company, or it could be a tiny one. Now, this actually gives me cause for hope, certainly in terms of sustainability, because a website is always going to be the same size on your screen. Obviously, there's going to be a certain amount of depth and there's personalization and all of that. But this does mean a relatively small company, if they can get the publicity, if they can get the footfall, can actually cut through and start selling directly to the consumer and get those efficiencies of small scale. So it's a case then of winning that business and being distinctive and trying not to sell on price, which is very important. I put that acronym there, which is I want it, and I want it now. I want it immediately and I want it now, which is how consumers are behaving at the moment. Just again, people to look at, this guy called Chris Anderson, who works for Wired magazine, and he wrote a seminal book called The Long Tail, and that's about how big companies, especially online, can have this huge inventory. They can have their warehouses in the cheap part of the country. If you're prepared to wait, you can get anything you want, and this is why we have this tremendous diversity at the moment. Now, just to summarize, so we've got fashion products, and I'm really looking at this idea of risk. We got this situation when buyers, designers are having to design for quantities of 100,000 units, 50,000 units. Everyone wanted to play safe. The management say, well, why are you designing something completely different? We ought to be designing what everybody else is doing. So suddenly you have this very, very muddy and very sort of ordinary fashion landscape. Now I think we can move into something a lot more interesting for the consumer and a lot more individual. That is my optimism, and I do like to be optimistic. And just a quick bit of philosophy, please remember there are things things that you know that you do not know, but then it's the unknown unknowns, and you can find out your unknown unknowns by looking at things. So just to skip through some companies, these are not all companies, but these are just a few that I think have solved problems and done things in an interesting way. Benetton, they solved this idea of choice and color by just knitting everything up in what we call grise state and then changing the color to order. So they'll make 100,000 gray jumpers, and then they'll pick off, say, 50 or 100 or 1,000, and then dye them in a particular color. And this way they get this tremendous service to the consumer, and they create that ability to scale up production and get the really high quality, and then give that individuality through the way they dye up the fabrics. And of course, they're getting into the metaverse in a big way, and I'm sure that's something that David will talk about. This idea of this interaction with the consumer that I think is so important. At the other end of the scale, we have Shein. Shein are doing really interesting things. Is they don't necessarily order in 100,000 units, despite the fact they could sell that easily. They may prefer to buy in relatively small amounts. Let's say buy 5,000 units at a time, or maybe even 100 units at a time. They put it on their website, find out how long it takes to sell out. If it sells out quickly, then repeat it. So there's this whole new area of repeat, sell, and then when it stops selling, then stop. So you're not stuck with that big inventory. And this is where this whole idea of making, the computerization, and the linking up of information is so important for the globalization. The braces I'm wearing at the moment, those are made by a company that call themselves Bronson. They appear to be based in the States, but all the manufacturers in China. This was just the app on my phone. I just thought I'd track it. I was fascinated, and it made in China and flew over to me. The logistics we've got now through the internet, and I'm just throwing that out as a sort of basic term here, are absolutely incredible in so much that in the old days when I worked, they had to send me off to the Far East, which was absolutely brilliant, and everything was done by telex or fax, and each page of the fax took 20 minutes to go through and stuff like that. Now everything's done in real time. You can take photographs of things, you can swap images around. We've got what we call PLM systems. So this link between the factory and production and getting the source materials is so fast. And then we've got this amazing economic ability just to buy things. Now, obviously, I'm an academic now, so I do like people to read. This is a great little piece here by this lady called Philomena Keat, and it's talking about authenticity in genes and how Edwin and companies like Full Count basically took American genes and then started reproducing them. And this whole idea of authenticity, both indexical and iconic, is really worth looking at in terms of fashion and what you can and can't do. If you look at your own jeans, you can, there are questions, you can see different stitches. I've just labeled lock stitch, chain stitch. There's an overlock 3-thread in the middle that immediately tells you this is a mechanized garment. This is not made by hand. We also have the chain stitch down the bottom there. And if you look at the accuracy, this is a garment that's been made to scale, and yet it is stitched to the 0.5 millimeter or maybe even the 1/4 millimeter. And I look at all the distance involved. There's the quality there, and there are no broken needles in the garment, thank God. How you get this quality is by something called folders, and I could talk for 3 or 4 hours on this, but I won't. But we have all this machinery going to make and create these garments. Now, just to get a quick example, a folder like this will cost maybe £300 or £400 to have made, because they're all made by hand. You may have 10 machines, maybe 20 machines, all making the waistbands. So that'll be a £3,000, £30,000 investment. And that's why sometimes there is a resistance to change in the factory. So if you do go into a factory, be careful what you ask for, because it could cost money, and then they'll want high quantities and things like that. You can get a lot of information just by going onto industrial sewing machine sites, and they will give you all the information. As a business student, it's good to know about this. You need to know just enough to know that the person in front of you is being serious with you. That's really what you want to know. There's some incredible developments with what we call whole garment stitching, and this almost goes back before Adam Smith in terms of like one machine makes one entire garment, as opposed to the garment being divided out between a number of different pieces here. Again, because coming back to my jeans, this is a mechanized product made with computerized stitching to an incredibly high quantity, made in quantities of 100,000, 200,000 units, and everything is exactly the same. These are worn in by myself, so this is, I do not agree with stonewashing, actually. And this is just more, because I like to show close-up pictures of my jeans, basically, and I'm slightly aware of time, so I'm going to speed up there. But that's the bit you can really copyright, and that's the bit that's really important, is having a logo on the garment to actually distinguish it from others. And here's a pair of jeans before I've actually started to wear them in. On the other end of the scale, we have McQueen, and they work in an incredibly interesting way. These are my students, and we took them into the McQueen exhibition place. It's in London, down the end of Bond Street. And couture originally used to be a customer. Something was made for the customer. She'd walk down the catwalk, have it made for her. What McQueen do, they make, if you like, press pieces, experimental pieces, inspirational pieces. They send them down the catwalk, and they're not for sale, but they'll be used to inspire their ready-to-wear collection. So again, if you look at the business model of McQueen and see how they work, and if you get the chance to go to London, go down the bottom of Bond Street, go upstairs. They're incredibly welcoming. If you book an appointment, they can talk you through some of the ideas there. And I would really recommend that. As I hope you get the impression, I just love sewing, basically. I don't care where it is. I just really like sewing. This to me, again, gives me cause for optimism. This is a device called Clo. There's also a device called Madaris as well, made by Electra. The reason for this is a designer sometimes had to work with a buyer, and sampling is incredibly expensive. The buyer may be tempted to buy a garment and say, well, look, why don't we do this? Instead, you could work and do something electronically and digitally. So for the first time, a designer could say, look, this is how it would look if it was actually made up. And again, this software is relatively cheap, and I think it's fantastic where it's done. We've got other companies here which are making one-offs, and they're making digitally, so it's made to order. So this is a digital way of couture as well. We have companies marketing themselves as craftspeople. This is a relatively small company up in Manchester, England, but they can distribute around the entire world. And then obviously we have the really expensive merchandise here from Hermes, and they're talking about their history and their delivery and their make, along with the craftsmanship and the support which they have for the local community. And then right towards the end, we have a company called TrueFit, and they will provide all the data for you, and they will make sure that you do not get the returns, which is actually really important. So hopefully I haven't run over too much, but that was a very quick sort of run through. And I am now finished. Do you want me to stop if I can?
Thank you very much, Tim, for a very inspiring presentation. And well, now we come to the legal part, to the legal analysis of the industry. So David Fuentes, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your introduction, Helen, Felipe, and congratulations, Tim, for your interesting speech. I'm going to share my screen. So, can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to talk about IP protection in the fashion sector. It is a real pleasure to take part in this international talk. Well, as the slide rightly indicates, I'm going to talk to you about main IP legal tools, contracting and license agreements, and finally, about the amazing world of metaverse and NFTs, the so-called non-fungible tokens. I hope that it will serve as a kind of preview, since I know that I will try to address some of the issues of interest in the fashion sector, but not all of them, given the limited time I have. So having said that, nowadays, Spain and in general terms, the European Union are synonymous with creativity and innovation, and therefore intellectual property is a vital tool to protect fashion products and companies. So what are the main intellectual property legal tools available in the fashion sector? Firstly, well, we have trademarks and non-traditional trademarks. Distinctive signs, including non-traditional trademarks such as color marks, position marks, shape marks, and patent marks are widely used in the fashion industry to display its essential functions. Among others, the indication of commercial origin of the goods. And well, this kind of protection tool, IP protection tool, is valid for a period of 10 years and can be renewed indefinitely for identical periods, and shall be vulnerable for non-use if the trademark is used by the right holder or a licensee within the 5 years following registration. In this context, some issues of interest in relation to this kind of IP protection tool could be, first of all, the importance of non-traditional trademarks in the fashion sector. In this sense, note that, for example, depending on the case, we could protect a smell or a color. In relation to a color, think about the Louboutin case and its red over red shoes and even a smell, although it would be a difficult task, since to obtain registration of a smell mark, applicants must be able to represent the product smell and must show its differences from the product itself. On the other hand, attention should be paid to the potential infringement through AdWords, as there are many competitors who may take advantages of this kind of advertising tools to undermine the functions of the trademarks and take advantages of the brand's reputations. When I speak about AdWords advertising tools, I also make reference to other kind of advertising tools such as Bing, not only Google AdWords. So, and finally, we should try to avoid the vulgarization of trademarks by using, for example, legends such as the register symbol, among others. I have also indicated some judgments, some interesting judgments that may be of interest in relation to this fashion sector. First of all, in the SEC one, the office invalidated the trademark consisting of the wording "all corps are bastard." It's a well-known sign in some groups, but the office invalidated this sign register for clothing on public order and good moral grounds. This is, in essence, a good example of the fact that we cannot register just any type or any kind of trademark. In the Italian one, Gucci wins the case because of its well-known trademarks. In this sense, it is not the same if the trademark is well-known as it is not, since if the trademark is well-known, it could be easier to infringe. Then, of course, we have the design rights. Registered and unregistered designs are a robust protection tool for the overall external appearance of different wearable items available in this sector, in the fashion industry. European Union and Spanish registered designs are valid for 5 years and renewal for identical periods of time up to the maximum of 25 years. Non-registered designs could be a good option for the asset protection in the fashion sector, since designs are generally seasonal. But among other issues, it has to be noted that non-registered designs are valid for just 3 years as of the date of first disclosure. Without prejudice the foregoing, this is a very important European judgment, date 28th of October of last year, which shows that in the fashion sector, you can choose what you want to protect under non-registered design. For example, a specific and a small listing component of or part, which is in a, for example, in a jacket, and what you want to protect under registered design, provided that the appearance of that part or component is clearly identifiable. There is another very interesting recent case concerning the protection of registered designs. This case is the so-called Spanish cachirulo case. The cachirulo is a traditional hair scarf from the Spanish region of Aragon. Well, in this case, the Spanish Supreme Court declared that the invalidity of the Spanish industrial design rights consisting of applying the cachirulo pattern to a neck brace due to the lack of novelty and individual character, ordering its cancellation at the Spanish Patent and Trademark Office. On the other hand, we have another interesting tool, which is copyright protection, so-called copyright protection, and also we don't have to forget about their related rights, but well, mainly copyright protection. Copyright protection is often used in the fashion industry. As of the date of creation and without need of registration, the copyright holder is primarily or mainly provided with moral rights and some economic rights, exclusive rights also, in the course of trade for a period of 70 years as of the author's death, as a general rule. When I speak about economic rights, I'm referring to distribution rights, public to communication, communication to the public, excuse me, reproduction, and also transformation. Two cumulative conditions must be satisfied for the subject matter to be classified as a protected work under copyright. First of all, the subject matter concerned must be original in the sense that it is the author's own intellectual creation. This is the so-called subjective originality, which is different from the objective originality that can be similar as the novelty in the pattern firm but is different. And on the other hand, we have the subject matter protected by copyright, which must be expressed in a manner which makes it identifiable with sufficient precision and objectivity. Some current trends in relation to this field, to copyright field, could be the protection of store layout and online fashion stores and the copyright. And on the one hand, they could be protected by copyright law, as I have said, since the list of protectable works is not exhaustive, with due regard to, for example, unfair competition ex post protection. As a good example, we can see the Kiko Milano case, in which the Italian Supreme Court recognized copyright protection over its store layout. Then we can mention pictures in social media, primarily or mainly via Instagram, which is interesting because, first of all, fashion advertising is essential, as it is a key aspect of a company business strategy. In this context, in addition to negotiating on copyright or where applicable related rights in pictures, it should be borne in mind that the use of the picture of celebrities, influencers, or sports stars such as Fernando Alonso or Pau Gasol entails legal issues that must be taken into account when drafting agreements or contracts related to fashion advertising, in particular, especially in relation to sponsorship contracts. This being the case, image rights holders have the right to authorize the use of their image, name, voice, etc., by signing agreements with clauses on image uses with due regard for the national rules on image and data protection. Likewise, the exclusivity and non-competition clauses are important for fashion companies since they grow in a kind of a competitive global market. This kind of clauses can be drafted in relation to a general sector, for example, men's clothing, or to a specific sector of products. For example, male underwear. This is a wide range of options, but in any case, it would be a case-by-case analysis. And finally, it has to be noted that in order to preserve the prestige and reputation of the fashion company, a moral rights clause could be incorporated into the agreements. For example, to not make critical judgment on the company or to maintain the physical image in good condition. Indeed, at least under Spanish legislation, legal entities have moral rights. We have a lot of case law and in this sense. And well, as regards copyright protection, there is an interesting recent judgment. In this case, among other issues, the German court declares that a piece of jewelry in the form of two overlapping magnetic hearts is not protected under copyright law if several designs features are detected by the purpose of use, namely in this case, the energetic effect, where the design doesn't otherwise stand out from the customary forms of jewelry of this kind. And well then, are there any other pertinent IP rights in the fashion sector? The answer is yes. See in this sense the patents, trademark secrets, and domain names. As regard patents, those functional aspects of wearable items pertaining to the fashion industry and their method of manufacture may be subject to patent protection as long as they meet the patentability requirements for a non-extendable period of 20 years. With regard to trade secrets in the fashion industry, specific elements such as materials used for the manufacture, the identity of specific suppliers, or the terms and conditions applicable to the supply of goods may be protected through this interesting tool, this IP tool. The main vulnerability of this form of protection is that it doesn't confer the legitimate owner with an exclusive right enforceable against any third party, but only against those who are responsible for acts of unlawful acquisition, use, or disclosure of trade secrets. Finally, as regards domain names, they provide a robust brand positioning online, specifically online, of course, and avoids misappropriation by third parties. I had also prepared a brief reference to licensing in the fashion sector. In this regard, it is enough to know that licensing in fashion sector, from design to distribution of products, is very interesting. Therefore, special attention should be paid to the licensing negotiation process, which starts with NDA, the so-called non-disclosure agreement. And in addition, there are several main issues that should be carefully analyzed when negotiating a licensing agreement, among which is the exclusive or non-exclusive nature of the license and the definition of the categories, specific categories of the products included inside the license. Well, I can finally, I can't finish it without talking about the issue that is, in any case, booming and is nowadays the main topic in the fashion industry. I'm speaking about metaverse and NFTs. I'm not going to focus on explaining what the metaverse and the NFTs are, but I would like to point out a few issues. As regards the metaverse, there are several legal consequences. Among others, in this context, it is therefore worth asking, will use in the metaverse by a fashion brand constitute genuine use of the mark in its core classes, or will new filings be required? In this sense, companies could need to re-examine their filing strategies. And on the other hand, it will be necessary to pay particular attention to the new technology clauses in licenses that generally extends the right of reservation to all technologies known at the time and to be developed in the future, since metaverse is something new, constantly evolving. And finally, a priori or prima facie, it has to be noted that metaverse will allow people to sue for infringement in all the forms where the infringing content is made accessible, with the possibility of claiming more damages for the breach worldwide in the form where the infringer lives, thanks to the general principle, the so-called general principle of ubiquity already used for the internet. Without prejudice the foregoing, I would like to make a final point about NFTs. As you probably know, non-fungible tokens are digital tools whose wide range in possibilities raise several legal issues, mainly in the copyright field. And tokenization as a disruptive activity that has been fostered by blockchain technology can take place on both fungible and non-fungible assets. Although NFTs, non-fungible tokens, are generally focused on the latter, given their characteristics and because they target unique assets. NFTs can represent both physical, for example, a shoe or a watch, and digital assets. And in both cases, allow for verification of, among other issues, origin and ownership. In this sense, NFTs could be an essential tool in the fight against counterfeiters, helping IP right holders in their anti-counterfeiting activities. However, they may also enable infringement of intellectual property rights and negatively affect the legal certainty of the market or of this virtual market. In this sense, when not created by the fashion brand, NFTs cannot guarantee a product's authenticity because although they can authenticate the fashion item and its ownership, if the information initially entered in is false or in some kind of form wrong, the NFT will perpetuate that untrue information on all of its future sales. As a possible solution to overcome these risks, platform that sells NFTs should consider verifying sellers' identities. But from my point of view, however, this is complicated because the fact that most blockchain platforms grant anonymity to those who tokenize is a main aspect, and it's also another kind of risk in this special field. In any case, without prejudice to collector passion, the specific smart contract, general terms and conditions of the NFTs, and any additional agreement between parties who are negotiating about this kind of digital tools, here comes the important conclusion in this field, because I see that there are still a lot of articles and press that confuse between NFTs technology and the tokenized asset. It is because it is important to bear in mind that obtaining a mere NFT, obtaining a mere non-fungible token, doesn't entail the acquisition of property rights over the tokenized asset. In this sense, one thing is the NFT, and on the other hand, a different thing is the tokenized asset. This is all. Thank you very much for your attention. So please, Helen or Felipe, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, Tim, for your presentation for today. And also Helen, that has already left. Her apologies for this. I know we have small time for questions. So I address our audience here. If you have any question, any comments, any question you may have, also to any of our panelists, to Tim or David, please feel free to use our chat box to address it.
Can I ask a question to David?
Yes, Tim, please feel free to.
I'm fascinated by the NFTs, David, and my students start talking about this company called Bored Ape or Bathing Ape. That's it. Do you think it's a publicity thing, or is it for getting money, or is it, why are they doing it, do you think?
Well, first of all, it's an inefficient market because when you buy the NFT, you are, as I have said, you are buying just the token. You are not buying the tokenized asset, which is under that NFT. And I think that people really don't know what they are buying. So I think that this is the main point. When you obtain this NFT, you are not buying the tokenized asset. So yes, I think that it could be something which is temporal, no, but we need to analyze each case in order to know if the NFT is related to some interesting terms and conditions, or is a simple NFT with any kind of tokenized asset, which could be useful for the potential or eventual third party who is interested in buying an NFT.
I find it fascinating that we discovered a new form of value.
Yeah, I agree totally. It's a new kind of value. It's very interesting because NFTs can give a different value to something which initially in the physical world hasn't got any kind of value. For example, a shoe. There are a lot of fashion fields firms which are selling shoes along with a NFT, and this NFT can give an additional value to this a priori or prima facie not rare assets.
There's a website called Hype Beast, and they have a lot of fashion information on there, and they're talking about the stuff with this company Bathing Ape. I'm seeing all the stuff that Adidas are doing, and it's a very fashion thing. It's like, I want to own something that you haven't got, and it's this idea of this limited thing, which I find incredibly interesting.
It could be interesting also for small fashion designers who want to reach a new kind of commercial via to sell their products, and also for big firms which are consolidated in the fashion market. But well, yes, it's very interesting, and also in relation to the metaverse, where we can also find NFTs.
I mean, for me, in what I do, I always want to offer protection to my students when they're starting up a new business. Now, obviously, I tell them to register their name, but there are so many unfortunate examples of someone coming up that is genuinely novel, and then it's used by another company, is copied. What protection advice would you advise students to do, would you think, with their businesses?
But in NFT field, or
no, in the general field? Yeah. Because my optimism is that because the way we can sell things online, any company can sell to anyone in the world that is connected. On the other hand, it is so noisy out there. You have to show difference. And how do you protect that?
It depends on the specific asset. In any case, in one asset you can find a different kind of spaces to protect. For example, the title of a book can be protected by trademarks and also by copyright. In the fashion industry, you can protect trousers or a shoe by designs and also by copyright, trademark, and there could be also patent protection. But it is interesting, and it's a main point to know that sometimes you can protect in a cumulative way some assets, such as a shoe, for example. So it is, in any case, a case-by-case analysis.
So you're thinking of, say, Louboutin with his red.
As a trademark, in that case, as a trademark. But well, the specific shoe could be, or in fact, it is protected by industrial designs, and also sometimes, why not? We could analyze if the copyright protection, if that shoe could be benefit from the copyright protection.
That's very interesting. Do you have any examples of you working with fashion business people that you would want to sort of use as examples of good practice?
Yeah, we had a lot of cases in relation to fashion industry, but they are mainly in the industrial design field and also in the copyright field. We had an interesting case related to the specific pictures which are in some famous t-shirts, and the counterparty said that that pictures were based in some of on his father's pictures from 40 years ago. So there were some interesting issues related to the transformation or the reproduction of the original work of art. So that was something more related to copyright and not about industrial designs. But well, trademarks, there are a lot of kind of disputes in the trademark field, but also in the industrial and copyright field. I think that there are not too much in relation to patents, maybe trade secrets, but well, and nowadays domain names are one of the most important digital tools which firms can use in order to protect its assets, web pages, etc. So I think that another interesting point to be analyzed is the possible protection of the domain name along with the trademark rights.
That's interesting. I mean, that's the there's a student of mine, and I told him to register his name, which he did with the British trademarks. And then he got copied by someone. And the minute he told the person that he was registered, they just backed off immediately. It was really effective doing that. But then there's some people that try passing off and doing things that are similar. So it's a very tough business, especially there was a case in the UK about a swimwear designer who claimed that she'd been copied from Marks and Spencer's. But it turned out they were both using the same factory. So the case was quite weak. There was another case of Armani copied someone else's T-shirt, and that was most unfortunate because Armani, well, anyway, there are various cases and things like that. But it's really interesting part of the law.
It's very interesting, and the fashion sector, it's also very interesting because, as you have said, and you have seen, there are a lot of legal tools in order to protect fashion assets. So I think that there is a very difficult, complex, but interesting task in order to have a proper protection in this field.
Judith, I do
Yes.
apologize. I spoke far too long, so I was using up David's time there. I do apologize. I couldn't see the messages you were sending me. Are there any questions you'd like to ask me? Do we have any questions or anything? Or?
Today we have our audience a bit shy, I have to say. So we only wanted to close the session of today, giving a thank you for your time, your expertise, and your knowledge in this very interesting topic that links fashion and law. And thank you also to Helen and to our Vice Dean for International Relations at Faculty of Law here in Deusto University, to Felipe. And many thanks also to all our participants for attending to this session and for your interest. As said before, you will receive the recorded video by email within the next days. And also you will be informed about the Fashion Law Summer School, and as well as our Deusto International Talks that we will be launching from Deusto University. So thank you all, stay safe, and see you soon.